everyone. I'm Tom Zuber, managing partner of Zuber Lawler. It's great to see everyone here today. Very quickly, Zuber Lawler has been in the space since 2006, so we've done an awful lot of M&A, finance, and other deal work, lots of IP and regulatory work and litigation for some of the biggest brands in cannabis, and a lot of the notable achievements on the litigation and deal side as well. I want to go ahead and introduce my esteemed panelists. I'll start at the far side here. Keith, do you want to go ahead and say a few words about yourself and Kanha?
Sure. So, president of Thunderstorm, we're known for Kanha gummies, and now our new Kanha mini chocolate. We're operating in 4 states, Nevada, Illinois, and Massachusetts, and we also do self-distribution here in California.
Thank you, Keith. Paul, with Rove?
Yeah, Paul Jacobson. I'm the president and co-founder of Rove. We known primarily for vape. We operate in 13 different states. Started in 2016 here in California.
I'm Kendra Clark, General Counsel at Connected Cannabis Co. We do retail, cultivation, focus on genetics, and we are in California, Florida, and Arizona.
George Sadler. I'm a co-founder of Gelato. We are a multi-state, Michigan, California, just entering into Missouri and Arizona.
Thank you very much, and let's go ahead and dive into it. So, of course, what's on everyone's mind? The election, very exciting election, obviously, and the impact that this is going to have on the cannabis industry. Specifically, for my panelists here, what impact do we think that the federal election is going to have, the outcome of it, on the substance and timing of cannabis rescheduling at the federal level? Why don't we go ahead and start with Paul on that?
Well, my guess is as good as anybody's, I guess, but I think that the wheels have been set in motion. The HHS they've already given their recommendation to reschedule it, and the Department of Justice is doing their thing. A lot remains to be seen who Trump appoints as the Attorney General, and that guy's feelings on cannabis may delay things, but I'm optimistic that since the ball is already in motion, it's it may go through on the schedule that we're currently hoping for.
Thanks, Paul. Any other thoughts on rescheduling here in the context of the election results?
I think until the South secedes from the Union, it's a wild card.
Any other thoughts? All right, let's. We're going to come back to the election quite a number of times, so we'll go ahead and move on to a related topic, which is also on everyone's mind and has been for a while. How will changes in federal banking laws that might accompany rescheduling impact access to capital for cannabis companies in California specifically? And why don't we, for that one, go to Kendra?
Thanks, Tom. That's a good question. So I'm kind of thinking that most cannabis companies at this point have banking, and any changes in the banking laws will provide access to maybe larger institutions, lines of credit. But ultimately, I'm not so sure that it's going to be as impactful as we think. In that, I think in the end, cannabis in and of itself may still be viewed by banks as a credit risk. So ultimately, in the background of these new availability of potential credit, that there still will be this, the credit risk of cannabis in general is going to be on the mind.
Thank you, Kendra. And Keith, how about you? Any thoughts in regard to how changes in federal banking laws will affect things in the context of the election?
Yeah, we don't know exactly the impact of rescheduling on banking, but I think what the cannabis industry really needs is access to traditional banking tools so we can monetize our balance sheet. We're all sitting on AR, inventory, millions of dollars worth, in some cases tens of millions of dollars worth. A normal company is going to walk down to their bank and talk to their banker and figure out a line of credit. What's beautiful about a line of credit is you only use it when you need it, so you're only paying interest when your working capital is low. There's seasonality to your business. You have the opportunity to pay back the loan without prepayment penalties. Now, most of you know that the debt lenders in our space are charging kind of mid-teen to high teens. There's a lot of covenants. Honestly, they're doing the industry a favor It's buyer beware on interest rates like that, but I'm not in any way complaining. But it's difficult to drive EBITDA and profitability with interest rates that high. So I just think traditional banking tools are key to the industry.
Yeah, also, I think it's important to remember that banks can take cannabis business right now. East West Bank takes cannabis business directly. They can and will make loans, although they're very small. You made the point that it's primarily a credit risk, and I think that's going to persist after rescheduling.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, let's talk about opportunities in the context of rescheduling, assuming that it does happen. How might rescheduling create opportunities for California-based cannabis companies to better compete and/or expand nationally and internationally? George, you want to take a swing at that one?
I think the biggest part for us would be interstate, being able to have the ability to not set up in every state. So if the rescheduling allows that, I know that's one of the biggest things that we're looking for, is being able to set up a hub just like any other company, business, manufacturer, and base that hub somewhere that is beneficial to open up in all the states. That's what we're looking for.
Agreed. And how do you think that's going to play out, George, in the context of a bifurcation between a national medicinal conversation and potentially a state-by-state recreational conversation? A lot of that is going to be regulatory driven, right? Whether or not you're going to be able to transport across state lines for medicinal, that seems likely if rescheduling happens. But how about in a recreational context? What do we think about that?
Well, I mean, I think we're quite a ways off. I think we're, 38 states right now that are medical, 24 or 26 that are recreational. Granted that we do get rescheduling, I think there's just going to be a long time before we can even look at having all the states on a recreational platform. So, I think a lot of this is speculation, and it's great to be up here talking about it. But, 5 years ago, we were all talking about, man, in 3 years, look where we're going to be. Well, 5 years later, we're still in the same boat. So I think the great thing about, this industry is that we've been able to kind of circumvent around the regulations, be in multiple states. Most companies couldn't do multiple state with the way that we have to do it. So, I think we're ways out, probably a lot further than most of us even think, but the industry is very nimble.
How about internationally? Is there anybody here that has thoughts, first of all, ambitions to expand internationally, and second of all, any thoughts in regard to what impact this might have on those future ambitions?
Yeah, I think that so California, if you have a California license, the DCC says you can only do business with other California licenses. So if rescheduling happens and the DCC changes the regs to allow cannabis license holders to sell outside of the California license network, the most likely first customer will be the international customers, because all the other states that have licensed recreational programs have the same restrictions. And it's going to be, it's going to be tough. Even if federally you're allowed to ship across state lines, those walled gardens within each state, it's going to be a very slow process. Whereas internationally, as long as California gives the okay, we should be able to ship all over the place. And, I'm looking forward to that. I anticipate that that's where we're going to be able to expand the brand first in the context of rescheduling.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that would be the way to expand our brands, but it seems that there's cheaper producers coming online that I think will be a threat potentially, and I think that it may be more likely is that states come together in a pact and kind of develop some sort of ability to cross state lines amongst an agreement between them, if and especially if more power is given to states to make decisions with respect to the governance of cannabis.
I think the international thing is more of an accolade right now, to say that you're an international company in the cannabis space. If you look at what's happened in the other countries that they have, Thailand being one of them, it's kind of ironic that all of the flower that's sold there comes from the U.S. They can't grow it cheaper than we can get it over there. And how are we getting it over there? We don't have interstate. We don't have, transportation to other countries, but it's happening. So I think more so being a multi-state operator, it's hard enough, here, let alone to try to go to a different country. It's, to say that you're operating in another country is probably more of an accolade. I don't think there's a benefit right now, especially as a brand.
Kendra, you had brought up something, at least hinted at it, which is the notion of price compression, right? Being able to get product cheaper. And of course, I think that's on at least most of our minds here. If you can grow cannabis in the Midwest as opposed to in New York, for instance, or frankly, even in another country as opposed to the Midwest, how does that impact business plans? And are there any plans amongst the panelists here to take advantage of that or to address that in any way?
Yeah, I think that could be an opportunity. Being from Connecticut, I would always say that we grow the best weed in California, right? And so that it has to come from California. But and that will always continue to be a thing, and it still is a thing, even as much black market stuff is making it around. It's just far better when it arrives there. So. Potentially, I think there could be cheaper ways, but more on an international scale is where I see the real cost impact.
Go ahead, Keith.
So, I don't think rescheduling is going to open up interstate commerce or international export. We actually opened up in Thailand this year, so Kanha gummies are being manufactured in Bangkok. It is our goal to get GMP certification in Bangkok. It's a low-cost production country. They will learn how to grow weed. There is something called Thai stick that's been around for a while, but they could certainly use California expertise. Maybe Connecticut could go over there and help out. But there will be an opportunity basically to go to these different countries, get EU GMP certification, which is not easy. It probably takes a year and costs a few dollars. But then we could have the opportunity to export to Germany, that's opening up, the UK, Australia. So there is a future in international export. It is actually beginning to start. I think the entire Canadian public industry was based on this hypothetical concept that they were going to ship Canadian weed around the world and make a lot of money, which has not turned out to be true. It's not very cost efficient. It's not that great. So I do think that if you really want to look for international opportunities today, your best bet is to set up in a foreign country, preferably a low-cost country, that will allow you to export over time. Otherwise, I think it's going to be a whole long time until U.S. companies, unfortunately, have that opportunity.
Very good discussion on that, and I'd love to come back to it, but let me also talk about mergers and acquisitions. What are the thoughts of the panelists here on rescheduling and how it could influence the M&A and consolidation activity and trends within the California cannabis market?
I think, you look back at how hyped everybody was on something like this, especially bringing the bigger people in to grow the industry. And once again, I'll go back 5 years. The anticipation of Marlboro and everybody coming in and expanding, what's been done. I think because of this timeline for rescheduling, and it's always been a big hope, that everybody's been able to kind of backside touch the plant in a way. There's a lot of big companies that have sub-companies that are touching and are in the industry. When it does happen, if it does, it's going to be a big thing, but right now, I don't see too much avenue for anybody.
You're saying if rescheduling happens, George, you don't see too much avenue for the increased M&A activity?
No, if it does happen.
If it does
right now, I just don't see too much happening.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other thoughts from the panelists on that front, the M&A front?
I mean, the only thing that I would add is that I do agree we have a long road ahead of us, but the concept of M&A is exciting because at the end of that long road, you're going to have very viable businesses that are resilient, and those are going to be extremely good targets for, potential partners.
I think there's already a natural process of consolidation that's occurring in the retail space here in California. We're all pretty aware of. I think the next 12 to 18 months is probably going to be a period of consolidation for brands. I mean, we all know that without the holy grail of interstate commerce, it's very expensive to open up a new facility in a new state. And so to do it in partnership with one or two other brands rather than doing it alone, I think is the kind of move that will allow companies to be profitable and be able to expand in that situation.
Yeah, I think one of the key elements of rescheduling is the elimination of 280E. And just the act of rescheduling should trigger maybe a tempered wave of excitement, in the public mind. So the combination of some increased profitability with the pubcos and a little bit of renewed excitement should spawn a little bit of extra M&A activity. It'll give the hopefully a little bump to the pubcos' share prices, and that could nudge things a little bit. But as the other panelists said, I think that M&A activity is already happening and possibly accelerating, and I definitely agree with what Keith said about brands and companies in the same areas, in the same realms. Retail mergers happening, manufacturing and brands mergers, or at least like working together to penetrate these different markets. I think that will continue to happen.
I do want to come back to the 280E note and how much that's going to affect the businesses of our panelists here, the businesses represented on our panel today. One thing I do want to touch upon in relation to that same note, the M&A activity, the increase of it in the context of rescheduling. One of, I think, the key factors here, the key components of the analysis, it's not just the sellers, right? It's not just the participants in the industry today, including the buyers in the industry today. It's those that would arrive on the other side of rescheduling, right? So if rescheduling happens, all of a sudden, not to say that Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Coors Light or a tobacco company, any one of them in particular is going to enter, but we do know that a lot of them will enter. At least a material number of those folks will enter, and they've got serious capital reservoirs with which to do M&A on a level that we haven't seen yet, right? Another thing is we're going to open up to financing to finance those acquisitions. You're going to have very large financial institutions, some of whom our law firm represents, that have not yet decided to enter the cannabis space. Pharma companies that will look to acquire technology in the space, and certain medicinal focused companies, right? So does that alter the view at all, or does that increase the sort of, let's do ourselves a favor here and make an assumption. Let's say rescheduling is going to happen, right? Because I know that there's a lot of question marks here. Is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? How will it roll out? So let's make a couple of assumptions. Let's say rescheduling is going to happen in the first 6 months, which is a lofty goal, but let's just pretend that we know that for sure, okay? Which we don't. Let's also pretend that when rescheduling happens, it's going to happen in the way that I think has been intimated in the campaign, which is that we're going to go with the national medicinal cannabis conversation as per rescheduling, as that decision's already been made at the DEA level, as supported by the outgoing administration, and that also the federal government is going to leave to the states that task of running state compliance programs relating to cannabis. It's going to leave that as a parallel industry. Making those assumptions, how do we think that M&A might unfurl in the context of these other buyers that have not yet looked at cannabis in a serious way, that are going to show up with deep reservoirs of capital to do M&A on a level that we haven't seen yet? Are there any thoughts in that regard, and what that might do to the industry? And from my own standpoint, I think that the changes might be quite dramatic, actually.
Yeah, I think if that floodgate actually does open, it's going to be amazing for anybody that's, containing a brand in the state of California, or anywhere for that matter. Coming from a position of selling a company previously, you look at a company that's doing X dollars, and there's always those X factors in selling a company. And in this space, you're not getting that money, the value for that, because it's still just being held back. So selling a company for under 1X is kind of tough when other companies are selling for 5, 6, 8X. I think now you're talking about real money in that way, people that know this business and they know the value, and if it is rescheduled and everything falls into place like you're talking about, you're going to see some companies that are going to go for some really, really big numbers. And I mean true numbers, not not the numbers of X amount of dollars in paper and then some cash. I think you're going to see some real, true billion-dollar companies selling for 5, 6X.
I agree completely. I think that may be the case, and time will tell. But I do think that, well, we have a related problem today, right? Which is that the capital markets are deeply suppressed, and the degree to which they're suppressed makes no sense in the context of the numbers. In other words, they're undervalued, almost objectively so, from a mathematical standpoint, just based on traditional metrics that would apply to these same cannabis companies if they weren't in the cannabis industry. And why is that? Well, I think it's a supply-demand problem in large respects. You could say it's 280E, you could say it's regulatory constraints, you could say it's a lack of marketing, but I think really what it comes down to in the end is a lack of demand, right? But if the purse strings open up, if the companies with the purse strings enter the marketplace, and furthermore, many of the things that we talked about, which I think are secondary issues, 280E, enhanced regulatory concerns, more freedom to market in the context of lightened regulatory concerns, I think, in the context of a national medicinal cannabis conversation. These things all, it seems to me, point to heightened valuations, where the valuations not only start to make sense again, but if it happens all at once, a few of you I'm going to expect to take me out to dinner when you buy your jets, and I'd like dinner to be on your jet when you have those exits. I mean, isn't that what we're talking about here potentially? And of course, we're speculating again based on a few assumptions that may or may not play out. But given those assumptions, is that a ridiculous scenario, or?
No, it's actually really true.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was saying, is just what you said, just a little more educated. You know, I mean, the reality is that there is money out there, and we are completely undervalued when you go to a market that we should be, with the numbers and the security that we have within the business, we should be seeing those numbers. And the unfortunate thing is that until this thing is rescheduled and everything falls into place, people are getting deals on companies, viable deals on companies at a rate that's unimaginable for a lot of these guys that are bringing outside money.
Thank you, George. Any other comments on that? Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I think the key variable is uplisting. Can a plant-touching cannabis company be listed on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, right? If the answer to that is yes, then what you're talking about could come true, which is the deep-pocketed players that are primarily public companies could come in and begin to buy cannabis assets. So that's a key fork in the road.
I think another key fork in the road is whether descheduling will allow some scientific data to be shown to then actually have a pure legalization play. And if we can see that open up, absolutely, I'm with you. But until there's a lot of hurdles.
Let's ask, I mentioned I wanted to come back just for a minute, just for a quick answer. I'm talking 5 words or less, because I know you can't get too specific. As your attorney would advise you not to, which I'm not anybody's attorney except for obviously a couple companies. The question I want to ask here is, how big of an impact is 280E going to have on the dismissal of 280E as a concern on your companies? And again, I understand you want to stay general, but big, a lot, not so much, that type of an answer. I'd be grateful for that. Yeah. So just down the line there, starting with Keith.
Sure.
Not a big impact on our company, but if it allows retailers to be more profitable and they can pay their AR, it will make a big impact on our company.
Yeah, the brands, manufacturers are kind of middle of the road in terms of 280E impact. I think cultivators have it the least and retailers have it the worst. And, so we definitely suffer because of it. Having it eliminated will let us do some more creative things with marketing. We don't have to be as restricted there. But like Keith said, if it's a big boon for the retailers, which it will be, and 280E is really crippling for them, I expect that prices on the shelf are going to go down, but the retailers will be able to keep enough of the profit so that they are profitable, and it's gonna drive things in a really positive way.
I think it'll also drive things for Connected in a really positive way. The other thing is whether it's a go forward or a look back, right? I think that would be really helpful to figure out too.
I don't see it as a huge impact. I think, once again, being nimble in the space and having this held over our heads for so long, people have been able to kind of circumvent around and understand how to navigate through the 280E. Obviously in the beginning it was a huge struggle for everybody, but once again, I think everybody's been able to kind of circumvent around that.
We've been talking about some of the upside of rescheduling. Let's talk about some of the potential downside, right? We're going to have a whole new messy, probably very messy, regulatory terrain to navigate. So what regulatory and financial hurdles do you expect California businesses to encounter if cannabis is rescheduled? Open to the panel.
I'll start. I think we're both on the same page on this one. Coming from the food industry, I think one giant regulatory hurdle is going to be the interplay and how the intersection works with the FDA. And still, these products are not approved by the FDA. Many of them, and especially in the context of edibles. And I just cannot, in my mind, figure out how that will be overcome.
Yeah, the CSA does not authorize any recreational use of a drug that is on the CSA schedule. So being on 1 or being on 3 does not open up recreational in any way nationally. Then it flips over to being regulated by the FDA. And if you want to call it a drug, then you have to go through clinical trials. And there's currently not many cannabis companies that have the cash and the time frame to do that. So it could be a dietary supplement or food. I think this is where it's going to come down, and we really don't know how the FDA is going to move on that. So I think that's the big question. And this could be Pandora's box, or it could be something extremely positive for the industry. It remains to be seen.
There will also be registration requirements with the DEA, dispensing obligations. So I think there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, and I think, Kendra, you had mentioned that we don't really know how the FDA is going to interact, never mind the other federal agencies, but I don't think that the FDA and these other federal agencies have any idea how they're going to approach the subject matter as of today, at least not in some holistic sense across the entirety of agencies. So in that context, none of us really has any idea, to be clear, what this is going to look like. And
if you look at the nicotine space, I mean, the nicotine vape space, I mean, those guys still are all up in the air.
That's right, yeah. So a lot of fun for the lawyers, not so much fun for the panelists, but that's all right. Okay, I think we have time for one more, and I'd really like to get to it, which is a question from the investor perspective. If rescheduling leads to greater investor interest, how should California cannabis businesses prepare to capitalize on potential new funding opportunities?
Well, I don't think that rescheduling really changes whether you are attractive to an investor or not. You still have to run your company well. You be profitable. Have a heavy focus on financials. Make sure that they can be generated. That they're precise. That it paints the company in a good light. I don't think any of the rules of trying to attract an investor have changed because of rescheduling. You may have some companies or investors that are excited because of the rescheduling thing, but for the most part, I think they'll be very, very educated on the pitfalls of cannabis, and they'll be looking for problems.
Very good. I think we're out of time here, so I'm going to go ahead and let that be the last word, and I just got the hook. So I want to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I'm very grateful to Benzinga. They've been good friends to our law firm, and I think to at least some, if not all, the panelists here. So thank you, Benzinga, Elliot, and everybody for taking care of us. And thank you to this wonderful, esteemed group of panelists here. It's a great pleasure for me personally. Thank you all very much.